MG back with you, and today we're looking at part 7, Project Ginsu before YouTube. You have to bear with me for this video. The farmer is taking in his crops behind me here, so you might hear a bit of noise from that. So today we're going to get into looking at the rocker panels, and if I have time, cutting the front end off this thing. So I had gotten a bit of grief at one time about using a car that was as rusty as this one actually started out as. But that never bothered me from the beginning because of the modifications I'm doing. Stuff like the rockers didn't matter to me. As long as it was held together enough that things hadn't moved, it didn't matter really to me how much rust there was. Alright, so I completely replaced the whole assemblies here. That'd be the lower castle rail, inner sill, outer sill, and the outer finished rocker. So I ordered up a full set of everything from Moss. So I know in that picture the lower rail, or the castle rail as I've always known it, wasn't in that picture. That's because when I took the picture, I'd already had those sitting that I bought like a year before, and I forgot to get them out. So now there's a lot to consider when I was cutting these things apart. I didn't want all the cut lines, like you see a cut line right here, to all be in the same place. And now, since I lengthened the car 3 inches, but I moved the firewall back 1 inch, I was actually only going to be adding 2 inches to the total length of the rocker panels. I started with cutting the inner sill panels that go here, because I figured those would be the easiest starting points, the easiest part to modify. Now before cutting any of these parts, I mocked them all up as an assembly and made some marks around them all to figure out where to mark them, or where to cut them, so that none of those cuts would line up. Alright, so the next piece I modified was this castle rail here. Now there was a bit more to think about with the castle rail, because the center part of the castle rail here has a flat in it for this cross member to tie into it. So this has to line up with that. But I had moved the cross member back in the car a little bit. So I had to add a little bit of the length, like a ½ inch I think it was, up there. And then the other 1.5 inches back here, so that my total length was correct and that lined up. So then the next piece I actually modified was the outer rocker here. Now, in order for these parts here to line up to the bottom of the door like it's supposed to, that meant I had to take 1 inch out of here and add 3 inches back here. So the inner sill here was relatively straightforward. All I had to do was just add 2 inches. And that's when I removed the front rails here to start modifying those. So then I put myself together a quick yet simple jig on my table here to be able to modify the front rails and be able to do the one rail and then make a mirror image of the other one fairly easily. So I started out by straightening this front section of the rail, where I cut out that curved section that was in the original rail here, and filling that in. And then I lengthened it at the back here 1 inch before the firewall. Alright, and then I'm just going to show a quick shot of the two rails sitting side by side with the one modified and the other one still untouched. So this rail here turned out to be a little bit more problematic for me because down in under where the driver's feet would be, that area was all rotted out, and where the crossmember bolts on back there was all rotted out. So I took in a parts car that I had sitting here, and I cut it all apart and scavenged what I could out of it, because I also needed to look at the inner fender wells, and I ended up getting those out of that. So in the end, I ended up just rebuilding this area right here with just proper thickness of sheet metal, because that one wasn't much better. And where this area was rotted out, I think I ended up taking that, I believe, from just another rail I had, a section of a rail I had sitting here from a car I had cut up and just hadn't gotten rid of yet. And here I'm going to put in another shot of just the two rails side by side on the jig, showing how I mirror imaged them. And then it was at this point where I saw we have these plates in here right where the anti-roll bar attaches. I decided to extend these down the full length of the rail and to stiffen the rail up, since we're going to have so much more horsepower in this thing. Then I ended up having to lengthen the ends of these a little bit, because there was some rust in the very ends here, so I wanted to rebuild that anyway. But then I needed to add a little bit of length to them to put the crossmember where I wanted it. But I didn't do it as a straight cut, I did a Z cut, so they'd be a little stronger. It was at this point that it was time to bolt those rails back into the jig, so I could see how things all fit and how everything lined up. Then I could test fit the engine back between the rails, see how much room I had. Alright, well that's where we're going to leave off for today. The next time we'll get into actually putting the engine in place, see how it sits in there, and looking at the actually rebuilding the firewall. Once again, if you like what I'm doing, like, subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you know when my videos come up, and share with your friends. Let them know about it. So this is MG Rob. Later.